Hello YouTube. I have told my audience a few stories about the amazing personalities that existed in Russia in the 18th century, a fabulous and bloody century in the history of my country, and such personalities possessed often powers that could be described as paranormal, and I'll tell you more about them. But today I want to speak about one of them, the Monk Abel, who died in 1841 and is buried at the Yefimovsky monastery in Suzdal. It should be explained that the monasteries in old Russia were often not only a home to those who had voluntarily quit the hustle and bustle of secular life, but also a place of refuge to those who had committed various spiritual or political offenses, regarded as dangerous by the authorities. As for the Yefimovsky monastery, it was unquestionably an exemplary shelter, and unassailable and comfortable as France's Bastille or Italy's monastery of Saint Roch. Its dismal and damp cells were never sunlit, and its high walls, resembling those of the Kremlin, were guarded day and night by sentries responsible to the Father Superior. And it was there that the monk Abel was a prisoner from 1826 on. Much later, under the Soviet regime, the so-called glorious tradition of the monastery was supported and continued by the former theological seminary student Joseph Jugashvili, or you know him as Stalin, who decided that its moss-grown walls were quite worthy of such guests as the Nazi Field Marshal General von Paulus and his staff after the defeat at Stalingrad in World War II. It was there, as a prisoner, that the monk Abel died, formerly the peasant son Vasily Vasiliev. What brought him there? It appears that he possessed a rare gift, the ability to foresee the future. He was absolutely firm in his conviction that his predictions were correct and accurate, and wanted them to serve his country, Russia. But, as they say, home truths are hard to swallow. Abel's gloomy and merciless predictions about the coming incursions of enemy hordes, the deaths of the royal family, and other misfortunes, which invariably came true at the stated time, it all gave him an ominous reputation. His rewards, as might have been expected, were prisons and banishments, exiles, the dark cells of monasteries, shackles, hunger and cold, humiliation by his jailers, and bans on private predictions. Later, this was followed by harsh censorship of any mention of his name or predictions in print in the empire. More than 25 years of his life that lasted for 83 years and 10 months. More than 45 years were spent in prisons and exile. In the middle of March 1757, a son who was named Vasily was born in the family of the peasant Vasiliev as blacksmith and horse doctor in the village of Akulova near Tula. The boy, who displayed no particular diligence in tilling the land, developed an interest in religion, and at the age of 19 left his home to Rome, Russia. 9 years later, he reached the Vala monastery in Karelia, where he was given a home by the Father Superior Nazari. Later, he settled in a solitary cottage some distance away from the monastery, and it was in that cottage that he performed the rites prescribed by the statutes of the monastery. It was at the Vala monastery in 1787 that Abel acquired his great gift. How this happened and how Abel's prophetic gift made itself known is a mystery, thanks to the efforts of the Russian government censors, who diligently deleted all such details from the now known publication of the lives of this monk. All that is known is that two human-like beings, referred to Abel as spirits, took him with them, lifted him to the skies, where they showed him some books whose contents he later recounted. In addition to visual information, he also received information from voices that arose out of thin air and told him about future events. But information about this is scant and is scattered in small doses in the very few sources available. It was under the impression of what he had seen and heard that Abel began to write his first prophetic book, an extremely awesome book, as it was called by his contemporaries. In this book he dared to say and how and when the Empress Catherine the Great would soon die. The Father Superior of the Valam Monastery learned of the existence of this book, and it was then that the Abel's troubles began. Interrogation followed interrogation at ever higher levels up to the Senate and the political police, the secret department, where in March of 1796 Abel was subjected to prolonged questioning by the head of the body, General Makarov. Abel told him that his lifting to the skies and about the two books about future events that he had been shown. Once again, Abel told him about his lifting to the skies and about the two books about future events that he had been shown. He told the general that since March 1787 he had, like the prophet Moses, been pursued by voices from thin air, which had directed him to do or say this or that, and then, notwithstanding various difficulties, he had dutifully and meticulously carried out such directions. The decision taken by the secret department in March 1796 stressed the dangerous nature of Abel's prophetic book, with its libelous and insulting fabrications about the Empress Catherine II, for which Abel deserved to be put to death. However, Catherine had mercifully commanded that execution be replaced by confinement to the Schleswig fortress, and that the papers written by him be kept at the secret department, which was done. The march of time is merciless. The last months, days, and then hours of the Empress' life were expiring. On November 6, 1796, she suddenly passed away on the very day and hour predicted by Abel, as recorded by the prominent Russian 19th century statesman General Alexei Yermolov. Her son Pavel I, who assumed the throne the same day, released Abel and had a meeting with him. They had a long talk, at the end of which the emperor asked what was in store for him. He appeared to have received an encouraging reply, for he ordered that Abel be accommodated at a privileged monastery, and that all his needs be met. A year later, Abel began writing another extremely awesome book, so to say, and history repeated itself. Pavel I was assassinated by conspirators on the very night foretold by Abel. But before that happened, the monastery authorities dispatched the author with his books to St. Petersburg. The emperor was informed of Abel's prediction, and he commanded that Abel be imprisoned in Peter and Paul's fortress. It's St. Petersburg main prison. Horrible place. The emperor's days were meanwhile running out. Abel's prediction of Pavel's early death, apart from its direct mention in the book of the Lives, is indirectly confirmed by a high-ranking official of the time, Fyodor Lubyanovsky, who in 1802 became a secretary to the foreign minister. He recorded this fact: I recall the rumor about the prisoner Abel, who was kept at the fortress because of some prophecies. The emperor then wanted to speak to him and ask him about many things, including his own future. When the emperor recounted this conversation to Anna Lapukhina, she burst into tears, frightened and upset. Let's remind the present-day reader that after the birth of her 10th child, Pavel's wife was absolutely forbidden by her doctors to have intimate relationship with her husband. And Pavel at that time was just 40 years old. Beginning with the summer of 1800 or thereabouts, he became friendly with the black-eyed beauty Anna Lapukhina, later Princess Gagarina. It is easy to understand that her weeping during Pavel's account of his conversation with Abel was due to an emotional breakdown caused by the prediction that the man she loved would soon die. Pavel, 10 years before the Napoleon's invasions of Russia, by the way, Abel predicted the date of the capture of Moscow by the French army. Pavel I was assassinated by conspirators on the night of March 11, 1801, the exact day predicted by Abel, according to General Alexei Yermolov. Pavel was succeeded by his son Alexander I, who charitably commanded that Abel immediately be released from his dungeon. One might have expected Abel now to relax and enjoy the remainder of his life. But no, in a year and 2 months he wrote his third, extremely awesome book. In it was stated how Moscow will be captured and in what year this will happen. That was written at the beginning of 1803, like 10 years before Napoleon's invasion. Naturally, the appearance of this book and the prediction in it were reported to Alexander I, who commanded that the prophet be thrown into prison and remain there until his prophecy comes true. This time, Abel spent a long period in prison. The invasion by Napoleon's army began in the summer of 1812, and this became known in Abel's prison only when Napoleon was already in Moscow. The emperor's edict on releasing Abel reached the prison only on October 1, 1812. Abel was set free after much delay, only on July 1, 1813, receiving his papers, some clothing and money to subsist on. The subsequent period in Abel's life, judging from the surviving documents, was fairly quiet and untroubled. Several years were spent on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, Constantinople, Mount Athos, and other Christian shrines. He also visited his birthplace, the village of Akulovo, where he was detected by police agents. It was considered blameworthy for a monk to stay at a private home. In fact, all this time, Abel was under constant surveillance. His correspondence was inspected, and all his movements about the country and conversations were reported. In the documents that have survived to our day, there is no mention of any unlawful actions by the monk or breaches of civil or church statutes by him during this period. Nevertheless, in August 1826, he was dispatched to the Yefimovsky monastery, dedicated to the Savior in the town of Suzdal on the imperial orders of Nicholas I, and spent the last 15 years of his life there. There are grounds for believing that yet another of Abel's predictions had come true and served as grounds for his imprisonment. Among the conspicuous events of that period, the most noteworthy was the December 1825 uprising, an attempt at a coup d'etat in Russia. But no references to any prediction of this score have been found, despite the thorough search for such references by Russian researchers such as Yuri Rossius. Still, something clearly did happen. By the way, for 100 years, a sealed casket contained Abel's predictions about the tragic death of Emperor Nicholas II and his family. Some experts believed that there existed predictions by Abel for many decades ahead, specifically concerning the tragedy of Nicholas II and certain other events. It is known that many people close to the emperor and his family, notably Maria Geringer, Oberkammerfrau to the Empress Alexandra, the foreign minister Sergei Sazonov, Pyotr Stolypin, the French ambassador to Russia in 1914-1917, Maurice Paléologue, and several others, They recall that the emperor had, after March 12, 1901, told intimate friends that the approaching year 1918 would be extremely unfavorable. Maria Geringer revealed that at the Gatchina Palace near St. Petersburg, there was a small hall in which, surrounded by a thick red silk cord supported by poles, there stood a large sealed casket. It was known that Maria, the widow of Pavel I, had left instructions in her will that the casket be opened a century after Pavel's death by the reigning Russian monarch of that time. This duty thus devolved upon Nicholas II. The royal couple set out for Gatchina from their residence in a festive mood, but they returned, according to Geringer, very thoughtful and sad, and spoke to no one of their impressions. It was after that the emperor began to speak of 1918 as a year that could be fatal to him and the dynasty. As far back as middle of the 19th century, Abel foresaw Hitler Germany's attack on the Soviet Union or Russia in 1941. Some testimonies point explicitly to Abel as the author of the documents sealed in that casket. For example, the journal Pravoslavnaya Rus, or Orthodox Russia, in its issue number 13 in 1991, published an article by Khmelevsky called The Mysterious in the Life of Emperor Nicholas II. The article contained this passage: a clairvoyant monk told Emperor Pavel I about the future of the Russian Empire down to his great-grandson, and this was Nicholas II. This prophecy was placed in an envelope, sealed personally by Emperor Pavel, with his inscription on it, to be opened by my descendant on the 100th anniversary of my death. All the rulers knew of this, but none of them ventured to go against the will of their ancestor. On March 11, 1901, 100 years after Pavel had stated his will, Emperor Nicholas II, with his minister of the court and other courtiers, arrived at the Gatchina Palace. After a memorial service for Emperor Pavel, he opened the package, from which Nicholas II learned of the said fate in store for him. And the present author knew about this as far back as 1905, so this was an older article. It is quite likely that herein lies the reason for the hushing up of all the information about Abel and his prophecies. I'm sure we don't know everything up to this day. What's interesting to me is the actual, report of Abel being taken by human-like spirits, or human-like beings, we call them spirits, who took him with him, lifted him to the sky, showed him some books, and gave him knowledge. Very interesting. There's more about the 18th century in Russia that I will tell you, especially about one personality who could be, by today's standards, considered to be a superman, a super being, with incredible powers and knowledge. And I'll tell you about him in the future. Thank you for your support. I want to bring you more history of Russia with, of course, paranormal angle. It's very interesting. And if you like my research and can support it, you will find links in the description to this video. Thank you.